Hello everybody, Chris, look here, another edition of Strength School. Now today we're talking about avoiding injuries and trying to heal a cranky shoulder. So a few weeks ago, I discovered a little concept called middle-aged pull-up syndrome. And basically what that is that terrible tendonitis here on the outside of the forearm. I progressed myself to I'm following a program, a lot of swings and then it's pull-ups, right? And it's a beginner program for the pull-up. It's how to get somebody to go from 0 to 1. So my mind is like, well, I could already do one, so maybe I'll try to use the rings. And with the rings, I'll put on a weighted vest. So when I did that, over time, I started getting this terrible ache here because I added too much too soon. I went from not doing any ring pull-ups to putting on a weight vest and progressing myself to do a few of those. And at the end of the program, I had terrible achiness in here where I couldn't even really get a good grip on things. If I picked something up, I would feel it. I'd have to use my right hand, and I'd go to make my coffee in the morning in this left hand, picking up the pot to pour that water. And if you know me, drinking coffee is super important. That became a bit of an issue here, so I knew once it was affecting my coffee drinking that I had to kind of step back and figure out what's going on there. So, like I said with that, I progressed myself to go a little bit too far. Now let's backtrack a little bit more here. I've got this shoulder here that's a little bit cranky, and back in the day, I think there's this old saying, it's basically if you want to press a lot, you must press a lot. What does that mean? Basically, if you want to get your bench press up or your military press up, you have to do it a few times a week. You have to do it often. It's the only way to get better. It needs volume, it needs work, it needs practice. That being said, I took off with that idea, man. And when I was growing up, it was just bench press. From age 13 to like 23, it was how much can you bench was the answer, was a question. The answer to that question determined whether how manly of a man you were. But then as I started learning a little bit, and you could bench press. I heard it was basically a guy asked an audience of weightlifters, how many of you guys can bench press 200? Hands go up. 300, bunch of hands go up. 400, less hands go up, but there's still some few out there. 500, no hands go up. All right, so he goes, all right, you guys that can bench press 400 pounds, that the world record is over 900. I don't know what it was at the time, but it was close to 1,000 pounds with gear on, 800, 900, whatever it may be. Congratulations, you're able to do half of what the world record is. So it kind of puts these things in perspective. Well, if you get your bench press up to 315, cool. But at the end of the day, if you're costing yourself some shoulder pain and this and that, is it really worth it? So anyhow, before I get too crazy with these stories here, I did a bunch of bench press reps. Combine that with the sports growing up, playing football. Throwing a football as a quarterback. It's constantly rotating, constantly external rotation, thousands of throws a year. Then you're going to combine the bench press and that terrible pain in here, right? And my solution at the time was like, hey, I'm just not really going to bench press. I started messing around with some different push-ups, started doing a lot more one kettlebell overhead presses, right? So if you want to press a lot, you must press a lot. I learned that lesson that I was pressing a lot, but my body wasn't ready to handle the amount of pressing I was doing. That was an issue. Number two is I switched. I started to avoid the lift itself, when that might not always be the best answer because it's still a movement pattern that we should be able to do, right? So we can't just follow that idea of like, hey, it hurts when I do this. Okay, well, don't do that. That's a great approach in the short term, but then in the long term, we should start figuring out ways to kind of figure out what happened, why was I feeling pain, and try to correct it. Which brings us to today. Benefits of weight training, right? I don't want to say this stuff, hey, it hurts when I lift weights, right? Don't do that. We can't do that. We got to bench, we got to lift, you got to lift 2 to 3 times a week, I think, is ideal. We got to do some form of resistance training. It doesn't always have to be in the gym. You can do some stuff at home. You can do a nice challenge, with some light weights, whatever you got at home. 2 to 3 times a week of resistance training has a lot of benefits, right? The musculoskeletal system, our bones are going to break down as we get older here. And I talked about that middle-aged pull-up syndrome earlier. As we get in that 35 to 50 range, our ability we're going to just be losing muscle mass. There's no way around it. It's our job to kind of combat that and either try to hold the line or try to fight Father Time here a little bit and try to improve and do some more muscle building type of training. That being said, benefits of weight training, right? It's going to keep our bones nice and strong, preventing things like osteoporosis, sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass, and preventing just pain in general, lower back pain. Weak midsection might cause lower back pain if you start doing standing exercises, some functional training, so to speak. You might be able to negate some of that pain that you're feeling. So that's number one. Weight training is, I think, in my opinion, non-negotiable. It's got to stay in the program. Number two, the more that you do something, it's just like that running, right? If you go out and run a mile once a week, that might be okay. But if you run a mile every day, higher duration, all right? More frequent doing of an activity, the higher risk of injury. If you bench press 3 times a week, you might open yourself up to some crankiness in the shoulder than if you only did it once a week, okay? If something hurts, you know, just because some of something is good doesn't mean more is better, all right? There's that certain yin and yang, there's a certain balance whenever we choose exercise selection. So we gotta be mindful of that. Too much of something leads to injury. When we start talking about where are we getting injured, 36% are at the shoulder. Why? It's a ball and socket joint. I mean, it's got some crazy amounts of range of motion. And because of that wide range of motion, we might not have the ability to stabilize that the joint itself through a wide range of motion. So you think about, you know, you want to be flexible, you want to be mobile in the joint, but not so mobile that you can't control the range of motion that you're working in, all right? Does that make sense? You want everything to kind of fit. You want to be stable. Let's say you are benching or pressing overhead or even throwing the ball. Everything should be in that same groove. It shouldn't be this wild, inconsistent ranges of motion. We should have the mobility to do the right thing and be able to be stable and strong enough to maintain that, that movement pattern under load. I hope that makes sense. So too much range of motion in a joint means lack of stability, most likely, which is going to lead to injury, all right? That's what's going on here, 36% at the shoulder, all right? Now, I mentioned this earlier with my pull-up situation here. I went from not doing any ring pull-ups to doing ring pull-ups and putting a weighted vest on. I prematurely loaded that exercise without putting in the groundwork of doing ring pull-ups for a week or two, just to kind of get the body accustomed to it, and then loading it up, right? I didn't do that. And a lot of these injuries that do occur at the shoulder joint or anywhere in the body, for example, they're going to happen if we prematurely do too much too soon. Remember the duration thing. If I go out and I gradually, if I run 1 hill this week and then 2 hills the next and then 3 the next and then 4 the next, if I gradually do that, I'll get to a good spot where my body feels fine doing it. If I just go and I run 8 hills right now, it might be too much too soon. Too much is going to lead to injury, right? So if you're inexperienced in a certain thing, lay the groundwork, put in the reps, put in the time, slow cook it all, man. You know, think about that crock pot, man. You don't want to sear it on the stove top. You want to slow cook that bad boy here, not jump in and do anything too fast, too soon, all right? Now another thing here. I talked about doing things like throwing sports. You think about golf, you think about everything that you're doing with your right hand if you're right hand dominant. You're going to have a bit of an asymmetry. Now our bodies naturally have some asymmetry. You know, people talk about things like your heart doesn't sit directly in the middle of your body. It's off to the side a little bit. And different things like that with organs and some more internal things. Our body doesn't have perfect symmetry anywhere. We could try to fight and get as close to being as symmetrical as possible, but there's certain things that are out of my control. You know, if I throw a ball 10,000 times with my right arm, no matter what I do, there's going to be some asymmetry. If you play a rotational sport, you're probably going to be able to rotate and open the way that you do your sport a lot better than the other way around. It's just going to happen, right? But it's going to be our job to try to close the gap on that asymmetry, right? We want to be as symmetrical as we can be in terms of range of motion and in terms of strength. If you can press 80 pounds with 80-pound dumbbell with one arm and a 50 on the other, that gap is too wide. If you can do 80 for 5, you want to be able to get 80 for 5 on the other hand, but if you can't, maybe you do 4, maybe 3. Like that gap is closed, we could fix that and we can make it as even as possible. It might not feel as smooth, but we still want those numbers to be the same, right? We want to train ourselves to be symmetrical even if there is a little bit of a gap there. I hope that makes sense. Symmetry, then we got imbalance like I just talked about, right? We don't have huge strength imbalances. Now, one thing that they found here was the NSCA put out this shoulder joint study, and basically what it found is that the more that people weight train, you know, weight training participants, they basically are going to have greater imbalances than the control group of this study, because whatever they're working on those larger muscle groups, and they're often neglecting those smaller stabilizer muscles, right? And for the average person, that gap is only like this, but for the person that weight trains, that gap expands if they don't work on those small stabilizing muscle joints, okay? So, that being said, those of you that are in the gym, you're thinking that you're doing a great thing, but you might actually be creating a larger gap here if you don't focus on some of those small stabilizers, all right? So we have to keep that in mind. Not only do we have right to left imbalance, but we're gonna have imbalance between the large muscle groups and the small muscle groups, all right? How do you do that? Let's just say for the shoulder, you're doing different things like external rotation, some things like that. Things that I probably don't do enough but maybe this is going to be the motivating factor for me to kind of fix some of that stuff here. Also, there's also a little bit of imbalance between the way that men. Now think about this. How many, you work with high school boys, there's not a lot of things going on other than they just kind of want to bench press, right? It's like at the end of a workout, if you're like, hey guys, do whatever you want. Girls, do whatever you want. The guys are probably going to gravitate to the bench and the curls. The girls, they might be working a more lower body exercise or something for the core, all right? That's just how a majority of them think, all right? That being said, men, over the course of this study, this research that they did here, men had a larger imbalance than the female participants in the study, all right? I'm just pointing that out. We got to keep in mind the things that we like to do as men sometimes are a little bit different than what women like to do, right? And the things that we like to do are oftentimes not the stuff that we should be doing more of, all right? We should be doing some of that smaller muscle group stuff, some of those stabilizer things, maybe some of that mobility training to try to eliminate the imbalances, all right? And lastly, well, not lastly, I want to talk about some things that we need to avoid, all right? This study here, this research, there's specific exercises that put the shoulder joint at risk. So if you're specifically dealing with a shoulder injury here, we're talking about the flat bench press, the military press, the upright row, side raises, behind the neck pull downs, fly or pec deck, barbell snatches, and put your shoulders in these funky spots. Some of these exercises are great and non-negotiable. I would argue that the military press, the barbell snatch, kettlebell snatch, flat bench press for some. I mean, these things, there's big bang for your buck with these exercises, so you can't just neglect it. So what do you have to do in order to be able to perform these exercises pain-free? Like I mentioned earlier, we have to be careful. We got to slowly ease our way into being able to do these things. We got to be able to nudge ourselves to be able to safely bench press, all right? We don't go in there too much too soon. If we don't want to prematurely load the bar a little bit too much, and then we're achy because we lose our technique, lose our form as the weight's too much and it gets a little wobbly and shaky. Everything that we do, we want it to be looking smooth and athletic, right? I don't want to overdo it to the point that my technique goes absolute hell, right? Symmetry, imbalance, stuff like that. Symmetry in the body, it's going to be hard. We want to have this right to left balance. We want that gap to be pretty close, right? Also, in terms of the mobility type training, we want one shoulder to be as mobile as the other. One way that we could free up our shoulders a little bit is, they talked about it in the study primarily, is thoracic extension. It is required. It's extension, thoracic is kind of in that chest region, but on the spine, if people get kind of locked up and they're a little bit tight, a little bit rounded forward, we want to be able to, we can't express our full range of motion in our shoulder joint if our thoracic spine is tight and restricted, all right? We want to open up our thoracic spine, which is going to let that scapula slide into a perfect groove, or not a perfect groove, but a good enough groove to allow us to perform the exercise, all right? So when we're thinking about mobility and stability, we're not just talking about specifically at the shoulder joint, we're trying to free up the joints above and below. Tight neck, do some stuff to loosen up your neck. And also work right below that with the thoracic spine, all right? And lastly, let's keep this in mind. What do we got here? Too much too soon, don't do it. Mobility is important, stability is important. We're gonna create imbalances in the gym if we don't keep things in check, right? So doing all the big bang lifts are great for you, but if you're starting to feel some pain and experience some discomfort, we might have to work those small stabilizers, all right? And it's better to err on the side of preventative injury. The prehab stuff is a term that gets thrown out there than the rehab stuff where you have to go see a professional, all right? So keep the ego out of this thing here. Remember, we're in this for the long haul. Continually slow cook everything. Nudge yourself to be a little bit better every day, every week, and we're going to be a nice, healthy, strong person. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Peace.